Have you ever sent an email message and wished you hadn't, wished you could retract it, or sent a phone message and wished you could delete it? I know I have spent a lifetime doing it. Sometimes you can do something about it, and sometimes you just have to sit there and await the consequences of your actions. But occasionally it's possible to do something about it. This is a story about such an occasion. A deleted message. Rob Wilson was an angry young man. His girlfriend of 4 years had dumped him. He and Sharon had been dating since school. Her parents had never particularly liked him, but her mother had come round eventually. Her father, Cedric, was more stubborn in the matter. He remembered every little thing Rob had done wrong. The business about the koi pond, for instance, had been forgotten by everyone but Cedric. It wasn't that he mentioned it all the time, just that Rob caught a certain look in Cedric's eye when he thought he wasn't looking, which was the exact same look he had given Rob at the time of the koi pond incident. It was the look of a man who would like to do him bodily harm. It had been no more than a youthful prank on his part, while Mr. and Mrs. Poulter were away on holiday, to introduce a bottle of diazepam sleeping pills to the pond. And to be entirely fair about the matter, it was funny to think of all Cedric's beloved koi sleeping on his return. The sight of all those koi floating around belly up had, admittedly, been less funny, and Cedric was having none of it. And those little sneaky looks he gave him now and then indicated to Rob that the matter was neither forgotten nor forgiven, and betrayed an ill-concealed desire on Cedric's part to beat Rob to death if only he got half a chance. That was 3 years ago, for God's sake. Since then, Rob had got a job in the computer centre at British Rail. He was now 22 years old, and Sharon obviously had her heart set on him. There was no need for that old windbag of her father to approve or disapprove. He just had to accept him. This was not the 1950s, after all. Rob was polite enough to the old fool, listened to his pompous assery patiently, for Sharon's sake, and turned up for small parties and barbecues at their house in Dollis Hill, North London, with a fixed smile on his face, as if he actually enjoyed such occasions. The barbecue a few weeks ago had almost been the last straw. "Oh, one of the sausages fell through the grill into the charcoal," the old man had said, with a glint in his eye. "That's yours, Rob." "Ha, ha, ha, I don't mind," Rob laughed. Same jokes every time there was a barbecue. Cedric still thought they were funny. They weren't funny the first time, and they weren't getting any funnier. "I'm not sure if this is a piece of chicken or a piece of charcoal," said Cedric. "Put some sauce on it and you'll never know the difference." "Good one," Rob said humorlessly. "Another beer?" Cedric inquired, holding forth a bottle, and when Rob held out his hand, he withdrew it, saying, "No, you're driving. There's some homemade lemonade on the sideboard. Help yourself." "He's driving me nuts," thought Rob, and looked malevolently at the jug of lemonade filled with pith and pips, and a little rind for good measure, awaiting him patiently on the sideboard. "What a great barbecue," someone said. Were they just being polite, or was their life so utterly devoid of meaning that they actually thought this? Cedric took them at their word. "It's an art," he declared. "Oh, good God, no," thought Rob. "Here we go." The trick with a good barbecue is to light it at exactly the right time, just long enough before the food goes on. That is 25 minutes, no less. Resist the temptation, he advised his interlocutor, to put it on early. Wait until the charcoal is white. Don't be a hero and wait too long, either. A hero? He and Cedric inhabited different planets. On what planet was someone who left a barbecue to burn for 30 or 35 minutes a hero? Well, on planet Cedric anything was possible, it seemed. Pity there wasn't a planet which Cedric could sit on all by himself, somewhere in the region of the outer Ursa Major constellation, for instance. Always the sausages first, and put them to one side. They'll cook slowly, but tend to go on fire because of the fat content. Rob had an urge to shove Cedric onto the barbecue. He should burn easily enough with all that blubber. Chicken drumsticks next. Any chicken. It'll dry out on the barbecue if left too long, but you don't want to undercook chicken. Salmonella, you see. Arsenic in your chicken would work better, thought Rob to himself, as he helped himself to another glass of lemonade. 3 pips in this one. He spat them disconsolately into the nearby violet flower bed of Michaelmas daisies. It gave him a small feeling of revenge. They're hardy, thrive well in this kind of clay, loamy, well-drained alkaline soil. Cedric was wont to inform anyone who made the error of even glancing at them. And still he droned on. If you have bacon, it goes on last of all. Cedric's disquisition on barbecues continued. It'll be done in a minute, nice and crispy. Well, that's how I like it, so that's how everyone else gets it. Oh, get on with you, said Sharon's mother, Muriel. Have you ever known me to do a bad barbecue? He demanded. Well, there was that time everything ended up on the floor, she reminded him. Yes, and Dad shouted, Everyone is eating it, said Sharon, laughing. Rob looked at Sharon curiously. How could she stand to abet this old buffoon? Could this gene be passed on to their children? He wondered. I put it back on the barbecue, continued Cedric, and that heat is 250 degrees. It will cauterize anything. It had been such a relief to leave the house in Dollis Hill that Saturday evening, stone cold sober. What a trial it had been, and only homemade lemonade to inure him to the ordeal. Anyway, that was all over now. Sharon and he were a thing of the past. After 4 years together, she had suddenly decided they should end things. They had been arguing about one thing or another. It was something and nothing. Dad doesn't like you, she said bluntly, which was amusing to Rob because he couldn't care less. He had assured her with a nasty laugh that the feeling was entirely mutual. He felt relieved, he told her, that such a bloated, opinionated fool as her father had no liking for him. In fact, it overjoyed him. Things had quickly turned sour between the young lovers. She had ended up in tears, and things spiraled quickly out of control to an absolute breach between them. Rob was in a bad mood, and he gave vent to some of the feelings he had been repressing for years about her father as he walked about the park, angrily kicking pine cones along the autumn paths. He made an inventory of grievances against her father endured by himself in the past 4 years, and from these he conjured conversations, arguments, sneering put-downs, and clever, sometimes devastating rebukes, which he delivered now in his own mind to the hapless Cedric. At the end of this, Rob spotted a Coke can, upright on the path, teed up for him, and taking a furious run up to it, booted it into the shrubbery. Of course, such conversations were only partially successful in assuaging the might of his wrath, because each time one ended with one of Rob's witty put-downs, he was left with the distinctly unsatisfactory realization that Cedric was utterly oblivious to any of them. In fact, he was probably already celebrating the promise of Rob's absence and its assured permanence from his home. He walked back to his office disconsolate, hands deep in brooding pockets. It was unfortunate that Rob's first feelings of unbridled fury towards Sharon's father did not simply play themselves out in the discreet confines of his own head. But they didn't. The following day, a Friday, he had too much to drink at lunchtime and called Sharon's house. There was no reply, but an answering machine, with Cedric's irritating North London voice, invited him to leave a message after the beep. Unfortunately, he did. His answer was fulsome and expansive, covering such matters as Cedric's character, his appearance, his intelligence, even the legitimacy of his antecedents, was called into question. It struck Rob that he was somewhat inspired in the diatribe which had been fomenting within during countless parties and barbecues and other encounters with Cedric over the years he had courted his daughter. He even called Sharon's mother, Muriel, in what he regarded as being an especially inspired moment, a fatuous woman with an intelligence somewhat below that of the average chicken. Oh, and the koi pond, to tell the truth, he wasn't at all sorry about it. It actually made him laugh each time it crossed his mind. There, that should do it. He chuckled to himself as he replaced the receiver. He went out and walked along the street, his shoulders back, a smile on his face, with a sense of liberation in his step. He felt witty, urbane, triumphant. He was a winner. He felt he had been freed from a long captivity and could once again breathe the free air of London town. But it didn't last. Perhaps it was the onset of sobriety that did it, or simply the distance time lends to such matters. But by the mid-afternoon, Rob was not feeling half so triumphant, and he had a feeling of having burned his bridges while standing on the wrong side of the river. He called up a friend and arranged to go out at the weekend with him. He told him he was no longer chained to Sharon. "I'm a free man, on the prowl," he informed him optimistically. "Lock up your daughters," he laughed. "Good for you," said his friend. "What happened? Did she find someone else?" "No," he said. "It was nothing like that." "Well, why did she dump you then?" Rob felt annoyed. "It was more of a mutual thing," he assured him with dignity. "If you say so," his friend said doubtfully. "I do say so," said Rob hotly. "She's a good-looking girl," said his friend. "Looks aren't everything," said Rob. "Lucky for you they're not," his friend agreed. The conversation had not improved Rob's spirits in quite the way he had hoped. He was feeling increasingly uneasy. Well, there was no way back now. He and Sharon were history. She would have little difficulty in finding another suitor. She was a stunning-looking young woman, without question. Her new lover would probably fawn on her, be some fool who would be happy to laugh at her father's jokes, and her father would dote on him too. "Have another beer," he'd insist. No policeman around on a Sunday. He'd wink at him, an arm around his shoulder. "Oh, what the hell. Stay the night." "All right," the sap would say. "Another sausage? This is a nice one here." "No, I insist. You're one of the family." And Sharon would look adoringly at him. "Yes, go on. You need fattening up," she'd say. Her father, barbecue tongues in one hand, would draw himself up and pat his own considerable girth with the other hand. "One day you might have my figure," he'd say. "Oh, not if he looks after himself," Muriel would say. "Oh, stop it, Dad," Sharon would say. Rob would be forgotten. No one would give Rob a thought. Well, perhaps privately they might. Cedric would say to Muriel what a nice chap Sharon's new boyfriend was. Who'd have thought she could have made such a good choice after that last one? Yes, Muriel would shudder as the spectre of Rob arose before her eyes. There was something the matter with him. Yes, there was, Cedric would agree heartily. Do you remember how he poisoned all my koi? Yes, I do. Well, thank God she's got rid of him, Muriel would say with finality. I must say she's found a good one this time, Cedric would say. I showed him my koi pond. He was fascinated by the way I had to reinforce the concrete lining for it. People always forget to do that. If you don't put iron mesh in there, it cracks. Go on, I said to him. You can walk on it. That's 2-inch strengthened glass. Rob sat at his desk in work, miserable, torturing himself with such thoughts. He couldn't get down to any work at all. He was still moping when the phone rang. It was Sharon. Rob? Yes, he said, trying hard to repress the eagerness obvious in his voice. "You left some of your things over at my house. What do you want me to do with them?" "Oh." His heart was beating unnaturally. "I could collect them from your office sometime," he suggested. "Okay," said Sharon. There was a long, hopeful silence. "You said some mean things yesterday," she said. He knew with the sudden melting feeling, from the meandering tone, from the hurt admonishment in it, that it wasn't over between them, and his heart leapt. "I know I did," he said. "I was a fool. I didn't mean them. I just started spouting." "Yes, you did," she said. "But I didn't mean the things I said either." "No?" "No." There was another silence. "We are two fools," said Rob at last. Sharon giggled quietly. "Yes, we are," she agreed. "I think that's why we get on so well," said Rob. "It is," she agreed. And then, "So, are we still two fools?" "Yes, we are," he said. They both laughed, silly laughs. They had nothing to say, and yet they said many things amidst a conspiracy of whispers and giggles and soft voices for minutes on end. At some point in the conversation, though, Bob's face grew serious as something very unpleasant indeed occurred to him. He had a problem now. Things might be back on, better than ever even. But he had left the most unpleasant message possible for her father on the home phone answering machine. He suddenly knew his life depended, his future and all his happiness and those of any prospective progeny depended on his deleting that message before anyone else in the Poulter household heard it. "Where are you now?" he asked quickly. "I'm at home. I took the afternoon off. I just got in, actually." "Is anyone else home?" "No." Rob breathed again. His mind was racing furiously. He looked at the clock on the wall. "I need to see you," he said. "When?" "Now." "Now?" "Yes, as soon as possible. I can come over immediately. I can be there in half an hour." "Why don't you come over this evening?" "No, it won't do. I need to see you now." "But you're in work." "It doesn't matter. I need to see you now." His mind flailed about like a dying koi. "I have something to tell you," he said with sudden inspiration. "What is it?" she asked. "I'll tell you when I see you." "All right." Rob slammed the phone down. Time was of the essence here. His life depended on it. He dashed from the office, pulling on his jacket as he did so, and ran the half-mile to the tube station. From here he caught the tube to Baker Street's Jubilee line, and then the tube to Dollis Hill. How slow these trains were! How much peril there lay in the delays at the stops between connections, the slowness of people boarding and disembarking. The world was moving in slow motion, with Rob alone urging it on. He wanted to shout out of the window to the train driver up ahead to put his foot down. Friday. There was every possibility that either of Sharon's parents would return home early on a Friday. Were even now listening to a message on the phone. Good God! What had he been thinking of? He had been temporarily insane. But in this sort of game, a plea of insanity offers no possible respite from the penalty which justly awaits it. He willed the train on. He sat forward, grasped his knees with his hands, and closed his eyes, breathing deeply. He was on the last leg of his journey. It could not go fast enough for him. The suburban houses passed as the train emerged from the ground into the daylight of the overground rail. The slate roofs and the chimney stacks against the bright September skyline flowed by sedately. The telegraph poles strung out along the way ticked off their moments regardless. Rob fidgeted, looked about him. He wished he was on Einstein's train, that he could stop the time outside even as he raced on. But he, the train, and Dollis Hill outside all seemed not to have heard of Einstein and didn't care tuppence for his theories. At last he saw the old Art Deco station draw up alongside like an old friend as the train slowed into Dollis Hill. It came to a stop, and he was already waiting at the door, eager upon the hiss that preceded its opening, alerting him to the last stage of his journey. He was through the ticket stiles and out into the road within moments. Then he was running, a madman, along Hamilton Road towards Gladstone Park, closing with every moment upon his fortune. Would her father's car be outside the house? As he ran, he pictured it outside. It would be nothing short of disastrous if it was there. An atomic bomb could have been dropped on a major city somewhere in the world, or an earthquake visited a terrible fate upon some region, but it could not exceed the cataclysm now facing Rob. He had to delete that message before anyone heard it. He had to do it even if he had to take a sledgehammer to the machine. He'd find a way out of that one later if need be. He ran with everything he had. His shirt was out, his coat flailing madly about him, gasping for breath. Finally he saw ahead the house. He could see no car there. He slowed as he reached the house, bent double, his hands on his knees to recover, like an athlete in extremis. Still time was pressing him, but he knew he had made it in time. As long as neither of Sharon's parents had taken another form of transport home, he was safe. He knew also he had no control over this exigency. He pleaded with the gods for his deliverance as he walked, still gasping, to the door and leaned upon the bell. Sharon came to the door and looked surprised. "You were quick. Have you been running?" He nodded heavily. She beamed at him and kissed him, her arms tight about his neck. "Ah," she said, "you wanted to see me so bad. And to tell me something." "There's just you in?" he inquired, swallowing hard. "Yes, Mum and Dad won't be back for another hour or so." "That's good. So what did you want to tell me?" she asked coyly. "Eh? You said you wanted to tell me something." "Oh, that," he said. Yes, I did." "And you ran all the way to tell me?" she said delightedly. "Yes, I did." "And?" She was agog with excitement. "Let me get my breath a moment," said Rob, thinking furiously. She waited. "Well, it's like this," said Rob. "You know that raise I was talking about in work?" "No," she said, mystified. "Well, I got it," he said lamely. "Oh," she said, now puzzled by the anticlimax of it. "It's nothing," he said, waving it aside. "Listen, can I use your phone?" "Is your mobile not working?" "Out of battery," he shrugged. "Yes, go ahead." Rob went to the phone in the study and looked at it. He needed to figure out how to delete his message. It shouldn't be too difficult. He looked up to see Sharon standing, watching him curiously at his side, leaning against the door jamb. He thought for a moment, then said, "I'd love a coffee." She smiled indulgently and left the room. He began to study the phone in earnest. Messages. Answering. Yes, that was not at all difficult. He emerged from the room a couple of minutes later to receive his coffee from Sharon. He had a broad smile of the profoundest relief on his face. "What a day it's been," he said. "You seem to be in a right state," she said. "I'm calming down now," he assured her. "Just starting to get my breath back. All's right with the world." "You know no one will be home for another 50 minutes, said Sharon. "I can think of a way of calming you down." Rob looked at her, and a grin of relief came over him. He ran his hand through his hair. "Oh, I'm game," he said. Muriel came in at about 5:30 and greeted Rob in friendly terms. He was sitting now, relaxed and in a mood of perfect equilibrium, with Sharon on the sofa. "How nice to see you, Robert," said Muriel. "Will you stay to tea?" "Thank you, Mrs. Poulter. Yes, I'd like to stay to tea." Muriel bustled around, depositing her coat and bag and other things in various places, and a copy of the Evening Standard on the table. "Cedric shouldn't be too long now," she said. "He's in a frightful mood, though, so be warned." "Why? What's the matter?" asked Sharon. "I don't really know," said Muriel. "Apparently someone left him a message on his remote answering service, and he's furious. Sit yourself at the table, Rob. Sharon, come and help me with the dinner. He was very mysterious when I spoke to him earlier. Said he was going to wring that little rat's neck if he ever laid eyes on him again. Sit down, Rob." Rob sat absolutely still on the sofa, staring at Muriel. He was thinking hard. Just then the sound of a key in the front door was heard, followed by the sound of the door opening. The vigour with which it was opened and then closed sounded ominous to Rob. "Do you have a back door?" Rob asked Sharon urgently. "Why, whatever do you mean, Rob? What's the matter?" Muriel had gone out to greet her husband at the front door. Their voices could be heard in the hallway. Rob looked at the window in front of him and saw it had only one catch and a latch retaining it. He leaned forward with great earnestness. Desperate times called for desperate measures. "Does that window open?" inquired Rob.